The notification ping from my phone cut through the silence of my basement office like a knife through butter. I'd been sitting there for the better part of an hour, nursing a bourbon and staring at spreadsheets that might as well have been written in ancient Sanskrit for all the attention I was paying them. The amber liquid burned just right going down, a familiar comfort in what had become an increasingly unfamiliar life. Back on Monday. I'll explain later. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I read Dahlia's text 3 times before the full weight of it hit me. Another weekend getaway. Another mysterious disappearance with 0 advance notice. Another round of her treating our marriage like a casual arrangement she could opt out of whenever the mood struck her. My fingers moved across the keyboard before my brain had fully processed what I was typing. Perfect. My lawyer enjoys dramatic stories. The 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Appeared again. Disappeared. I could practically see her panic through the screen, and for the first time in months, I smiled. A real smile, not one of those plastic things I'd been wearing to family dinners and office meetings. My name is Tristan Locke, and I'm 41 years old. I work at Henderson & Associates Investment Management, where I spend my days moving other people's money around and pretending to care about quarterly projections. I drive a sensible Honda Accord, live in a sensible colonial house in Millbrook Harbor, Maine, and until recently, I had a sensible wife who planned elegant events for wealthy people with more money than sense. The key phrase there being, until recently. Dahlia Monroe Locke. She insisted on keeping her maiden name for business purposes, which should have been my first red flag, had been acting strange for months. Stranger than usual anyway. Weekend trips to scout venues in Portland. Late-night phone calls she took in the other room. Designer clothes appearing in her closet that I definitely hadn't paid for. And trust me, I would have remembered dropping $800 on a single handbag. But it was the little things that really got to me. The way she'd started putting her phone face down during dinner, how she'd suddenly developed an intense interest in cooking shows, specifically ones featuring this celebrity chef named Alec Drummond, a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a romance novel written by someone with questionable taste in men. The way she'd begun critiquing my appearance, my job, my lack of ambition, as if she hadn't married me knowing exactly who I was. My phone buzzed again. Then again. 5 calls in rapid succession, all from Dahlia. I let every single one go to voicemail. Instead, I did something I probably should have done months ago. I opened our shared calendar app and started really looking at it. Not just glancing at the surface-level stuff, but digging into the details, cross-referencing her client meetings with actual events in the area, checking locations against real businesses. What I found was a masterpiece of creative fiction. The Meridian Hotel venue consultation she'd attended last Tuesday. The Meridian had been closed for renovations since January. The emergency wedding planning session that had kept her out until 2 a.m. on Thursday. The bride in question had postponed her wedding 6 months ago and moved to California. But the real kicker was the recurring entry labeled Chef's Table Experience, Client Research, every Friday night for the past 2 months, like clockwork. I was still staring at the screen when another text came in, this one from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Locke, this is Cassie, Dahlia's assistant. I'm really drunk right now and probably shouldn't be texting you, but you deserve better. Ask about the chef's suite at the Meridian. I'm sorry. And there it was. The moment when suspicion crystallized into certainty. The moment when the man I'd been for the past 15 years, trusting, accommodating, willfully blind, faded in my basement office, and someone else entirely took his place. I finished my bourbon, closed the laptop, and headed upstairs to check our home security system. We'd installed cameras 6 months ago after a rash of break-ins in the neighborhood. Dahlia had complained about the expense, said it made her feel like we were living in a prison. Now I understood why. The footage from the past month told a story that would have been hilarious if it weren't happening to me. Alec Drummond, and yes, it was definitely him. I'd recognize that pretentious man bun anywhere, sneaking in through our back door on multiple occasions, always when I was at work, always staying for exactly 2 hours, always leaving with this smug little smile that made me want to punch my computer screen. In one particularly charming clip from last week, I watched him help himself to a beer from our refrigerator before heading upstairs to what I could only assume was my bedroom. My bed. My life. The funny thing about betrayal is how it clarifies everything. All those months of second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being paranoid or oversensitive, wondering if maybe I really was as boring and predictable as Dahlia had started implying, all of that just evaporated. The problem wasn't me. It had never been me. I poured another bourbon and started making a list. Mason Reeves had been my roommate at the University of Maine 20 years ago, back when we were both young and stupid and convinced we were going to change the world. He'd wanted to be a cop then, said he was going to clean up the streets and make a difference. I'd wanted to be a journalist, thought I'd expose corruption and hold the powerful accountable. Life had other plans for both of us. Mason did become a cop, lasted 12 years before the bureaucracy and politics wore him down. Now he ran a private investigation firm out of a cramped office above a pizza shop in downtown Millbrook Harbor. I'd become an investment advisor, which was about as far from investigative journalism as you could get without actually selling insurance. But Mason still had that cop instinct, that ability to see through bullshit and get to the truth, which was exactly what I needed right now. "Let me get this straight," he said, leaning back in his chair and studying the photos I'd printed from our security system. "Your wife has been using your house as a love nest while you're at work. And you want me to what exactly? Follow her around? Get more evidence? Catch them in the act?" "I want you to help me destroy them," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Legally, thoroughly, completely." Mason raised an eyebrow. In college, he'd been the wild one, always getting into fights, always pushing boundaries. 20 years later, he looked like exactly what he was, a middle-aged ex-cop with a receding hairline and a skeptical expression. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. "That's a dangerous road, Triss. Revenge has a way of eating people alive." "They already ate me alive," I replied. "I'm just returning the favor." He was quiet for a long moment, studying the photos. "This chef guy, Alec Drummond. I know that name. Wasn't he in the news a few months back?" "Probably. He's got a show on the Food Network. Coastal Cuisine with Chef Alec. Real groundbreaking stuff, lobster rolls and clam chowder with a modern twist." "No, not that, something else." Mason turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Here we go. 3 health department violations in the past year at his restaurant in Portland. Couple of harassment complaints from female staff that were settled out of court. And this is interesting. He's been having financial problems. Restaurants hemorrhaging money. So he's a sleazebag and a failure. That's not exactly shocking. No, but it gives us leverage." Mason printed out the articles and added them to my growing file. Guys like this, they're usually desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Over the next hour, we laid out a strategy. Mason would start surveillance immediately, tracking Dahlia's movements, documenting her meetings with Alec, building an ironclad case of adultery. But more than that, we'd start applying pressure, subtle at first, then escalating. "The key," Mason explained, "is to make them turn on each other. Right now, they think they're in control. They think you're clueless. We're going to change that dynamic." I left Mason's office feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. For too long, I'd been a passive participant in my own life, letting things happen to me instead of making them happen. That was about to change. My first stop was the Rusty Anchor, the dive bar where half of Millbrook Harbor went to drink away their problems and gossip about everyone else's. If you wanted information to spread in this town, You told 3 people. The bartender at the Anchor, the woman who ran the post office, and Mrs. Henderson who lived across from the elementary school and knew everyone's business. I chose the bartender. Tristan Locke, said Jimmy Kowalski, looking up from the glass he was polishing. Don't see you in here much, usually just during the playoffs. Yeah, well, things change. I ordered a beer and settled onto a bar stool. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a dive bar in coastal Maine. Weathered wood, nautical decorations that had seen better decades, and the lingering smell of fried clams and cigarettes from back when you could still smoke indoors. How's Dahlia? Jimmy asked, because that's what you do in a small town. You ask about people's spouses. Busy, I said. Always traveling for work these days. Portland, Boston. Sometimes I wonder if she's planning events or training for the Olympics. She's gone so much. Jimmy nodded sympathetically. Event planning, that's tough. Weird hours, demanding clients. My cousin's wife does that down in Portsmouth, always stressed out about something. Yeah, Dahlia's been real stressed lately, especially about this new client, some celebrity chef, Alex something. She's been working with him on this big project, lots of late-night meetings. I saw Jimmy's expression change slightly. In a town this size, gossip was currency, and I'd just handed him a $20 bill. Celebrity chef, huh? That's exciting. I guess. Personally, I think the guy's kind of a sleaze, but what do I know about cooking? I finished my beer and left a generous tip. See you around, Jimmy. As I walked to my car, I could already see Jimmy reaching for his phone. By tomorrow morning, half the town would know that Dahlia Locke was having late-night meetings with some celebrity chef. By tomorrow afternoon, the other half would know too. Step 1. Complete. The beauty of small-town gossip is its efficiency. Within 48 hours, I started noticing the looks, sympathetic glances from neighbors, awkward silences when I walked into the coffee shop, the kind of careful, pitying attention reserved for people whose personal lives have become public entertainment. Dahlia noticed too. She came home Monday evening, as promised, with an elaborate story about a last-minute venue crisis that had required her immediate attention. She was animated, gesturing wildly as she described fictional problems with fictional clients, her voice pitched just a little too high to be completely natural. You wouldn't believe the drama, Tris. The bride's mother decided she hated the flowers literally the day before the wedding. I had to drive to 3 different florists to find acceptable replacements. I barely slept all weekend. I nodded along, making appropriate sympathetic noises while mentally cataloging all the ways her story didn't add up. According to Mason's surveillance, she'd spent Saturday afternoon at Alex's apartment in Portland and Sunday morning at a bed and breakfast in Freeport. The only flowers involved were the ones Alec had apparently bought her for their romantic getaway. That sounds exhausting, I said. Good thing you had Cassie to help coordinate everything. Something flickered across Dahlia's face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. Cassie? Oh, right. Yes, she was very helpful. Interesting. Dahlia didn't know that Cassie had texted me, which meant her assistant was either having second thoughts about the whole situation or was drunk enough to develop a conscience. Either way, it was useful information. I should probably send her a thank you gift, I continued. Maybe some flowers. What's her favorite type? I'm not sure. Roses, maybe? Tris, why are you asking about Cassie? Just trying to be thoughtful. You work so hard and she obviously goes above and beyond to support you. It's nice when people are loyal, don't you think? Dahlia's smile looked like it was causing her physical pain. Yes, loyalty is very important. That night, while Dahlia was in the shower, I checked her phone. She'd left it on the nightstand, which was either careless or a sign that she was feeling confident about her ability to manage the situation. The confidence was misplaced. 17 missed calls from Alec over the past 2 days, multiple text messages asking if everything was okay and whether I suspected anything. One particularly panicked message from this morning. People are asking questions about us. What did you tell your husband? Dahlia's responses were masterful examples of damage control. Everything's fine. Tristan doesn't suspect anything. Small-town gossip, you know how it is. Just lay low for a few days. But I could see the cracks forming. Alec was scared. Dahlia was working overtime to keep him calm. And both of them were starting to realize that their perfect little secret wasn't as secret as they'd thought. Time for step 2. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 5 times in the past decade, and drove to Portland. Alec's restaurant, Coastal, was located in the trendy old Port District, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, designed to look authentically weathered despite being less than 3 years old. I didn't go inside. Instead, I parked across the street and waited. Mason had given me Alec's schedule. He usually arrived around 10 for prep, left around 3 for his afternoon break, then returned for the dinner service. Predictable habits were a gift to people like us. At 3:15, Alec emerged from the restaurant's back entrance, checking his phone as he walked to his car, a red BMW that was probably worth more than I made in 6 months. He looked exactly like his publicity photos. Carefully tousled hair, designer stubble, the kind of calculated casual style that took a lot of effort to achieve. I followed him to his apartment building, a converted warehouse in the arts district that screamed, "Look how creative and successful I am." The security was laughably inadequate, a keypad entry system that I watched him punch in from across the street, 8273. Barred, pretentious and predictable. I didn't do anything that day. Just watched, learned his patterns, noted the layout of the building, the location of security cameras, the best approach routes. Mason had taught me that good surveillance was 90% patience and 10% action. Today was about patience. But as I sat there watching Alec's building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of the hunt. For the first time since discovering Dahlia's betrayal, I wasn't the victim in this story. I was the predator, and I was just getting started. That evening, I stopped by the Rusty Anchor again. Jimmy greeted me like an old friend, which, in small-town terms, I guess I was becoming. Back again? This is becoming a habit. Yeah, well, the house feels a little empty these days. Dahlia's working late again tonight. Another emergency with that chef client. Jimmy's expression grew sympathetic. That's rough, man. All work and no play, you know? Tell me about it. Sometimes I wonder if she's planning events or writing a cookbook with the guy. I laughed, but there was just enough edge to it to make Jimmy lean in closer. I mean, how many consultations does one project need? You ever meet this chef? Once, briefly. Seemed like kind of an arrogant guy, to be honest. The type who thinks he's God's gift to women. I paused, took a sip of beer. But hey, Dahlia's always been attracted to confident men. That's how she ended up with me, right? Jimmy laughed, but I could see the wheels turning. The seed was planted. By tomorrow, the speculation would be in full bloom. I was walking to my car when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Locke, this is Cassie again. I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere private? I have information you need to know. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Coffee shop on Maple Street. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Her response was immediate. Thank you. And Mr. Locke, I'm really sorry about everything. Step 3 was about to begin. Cassie Martinez looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was 26, fresh out of college with a degree in hospitality management and dreams of running her own event planning company someday. Working for Dahlia was supposed to be her stepping stone to bigger things. Instead, it had turned her into an unwilling accomplice in a marriage's destruction. I never meant for any of this to happen, she said, clutching her coffee cup like it was a life preserver. When Dahlia first started meeting with Chef Drummond, I thought it really was about business. He was looking for someone to plan events at his restaurant, private dinners for VIP customers. It seemed legitimate. When did you realize it wasn't? Cassie's laugh was bitter. When she asked me to book them a room at the Meridian for a working lunch, and specifically requested the suite with the king-size bed, that was about 2 months ago. I pulled out a small notebook, started writing. What else? Everything. I've been covering for her, making fake appointments, creating alibis. She told me you were having marriage problems, that you were controlling and suspicious, that she needed space to figure things out. I believed her because I wanted to keep my job. But something changed your mind. Last week I overheard her talking to Alec on the phone. She was laughing about how clueless you were, how easy it was to manipulate you. She said, Cassie paused, looking uncomfortable. She said you were so boring and predictable that she could probably move Alec into your house and you wouldn't notice as long as she kept your dinner warm. The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. What else did you hear? They're planning something. Alec's restaurant is in serious financial trouble, worse than what's been reported. He owes money to some very unpleasant people. Dahlia's been using your joint accounts to help him, small amounts so you wouldn't notice, but it's not enough. How much are we talking about? $40,000 so far. But Mr. Locke, that's not the worst part. Cassie leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. They're planning to frame you for domestic abuse. Dahlia's been taking pictures of herself with fake bruises, creating a paper trail of evidence. She thinks she can get a restraining order, force you out of the house, and take half of everything in the divorce. The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet, despite the usual afternoon crowd. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and calm, despite the rage building in my chest. Do you have proof of any of this? Cassie reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. Everything. Photos, financial records, recorded phone calls. I've been documenting it all because I was scared I'd get blamed when everything came out. I took the drive, slipped it into my pocket. Why are you helping me? Because what they're doing is wrong, and because... She hesitated, then continued. Because my dad went through something similar when I was a kid. My mom cheated on him, then tried to destroy his reputation when he found out. He lost everything. His business, his friends, his relationship with me for years. I won't be part of doing that to someone else. We talked for another hour. Cassie provided details about Alec's financial situation, Dahlia's plans, their schedule for the rest of the week. By the time we parted ways, I had everything I needed to move to the next phase. But first, I had a phone call to make. Mason, it's me. How do you feel about a little breaking and entering? Depends. Are we talking about the legal kind or the kind that gets us arrested? The kind where we don't get caught. I'm listening. That night, while Dahlia was at another client dinner, actually a romantic evening at Alec's apartment, according to Cassie's intelligence, Mason and I paid a visit to Coastal Restaurant. The building was empty except for a security guard who spent most of his shift watching Netflix on his phone. Getting inside was easier than it should have been. Mason still had contacts from his police days, including a locksmith who asked very few questions about late-night emergencies. Within 10 minutes, we were standing in Alec's pristine kitchen, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of equipment that would soon be repossessed if his creditors had their way. What exactly are we looking for? Mason asked, keeping his voice low despite the empty building. Evidence, leverage, anything we can use to make his life complicated. We split up, Mason taking the office while I focused on the kitchen. What I found was a masterclass in cutting corners and health code violations, expired ingredients hidden behind fresh ones, temperature logs that had clearly been falsified, a walk-in cooler that was running at least 10 degrees too warm. But the real treasure was in the office. Mason had found Alec's computer unlocked, his email open, and his financial records spread across the desk like a roadmap to disaster. The restaurant was 3 months behind on rent. Alec owed money to suppliers, creditors, and at least one organization that didn't send polite reminder notices. "Look at this," Mason said, pointing to a series of emails. "He's been trying to sell the restaurant for months. No takers. The business is worthless." I photographed everything: the financial records, the health violations, the threatening letters from creditors. Then I did something that would have horrified the old me, the trusting husband who believed in playing by the rules. I opened the walk-in cooler and adjusted the temperature controls, pushing them into the danger zone. I moved expired ingredients to the front of the shelves. I loosened the handle on the main gas line just enough to create a small leak. Not dangerous, but detectable by anyone with a working nose. "Jesus, Triss," Mason whispered. "You're really going nuclear on this guy." "He's been screwing my wife in my bed while planning to destroy my life," I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. Nuclear seems appropriate. We were out of the building within an hour, leaving no trace of our presence except for the time bombs I'd planted throughout Alec's kitchen. Tomorrow would be a very bad day for Coastal Restaurant, and it was only the beginning. The health department showed up at Coastal Restaurant the next morning at precisely 9:47 a.m. I know this because I was sitting in my car across the street, watching through binoculars as two inspectors in official jackets walked through the front door. The anonymous tip I'd called in at 8 a.m. had been a masterpiece of concerned citizen reporting. I had dinner there last night and got violently ill. My friend who works in the kitchen says they've been having problems with their refrigeration system. Within an hour, the inspectors emerged with grim expressions and clipboards full of violations. By noon, there was a "Closed by order of health department" sign on the front door. By evening, the story was all over local food blogs and social media. My phone rang at 6:30 p.m. Dahlia's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Triss, I'm going to be late tonight. There's been an emergency with one of my clients." "Oh no, what happened?" "The venue for tomorrow's event just got shut down by the health department. I need to find an alternative location and coordinate with all the vendors. It's a nightmare." "That's terrible. Which venue?" A pause. "Coastal Restaurant. You probably haven't heard of it." "Actually, I have. Isn't that the place run by that celebrity chef you've been working with? Alec something?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes. Alec Drummond. This is really devastating for him." "I'm sure it is. Food safety violations can destroy a restaurant's reputation overnight, especially if there were serious problems, expired ingredients, temperature control issues, that kind of thing." "How do you know about—" Dahlia caught herself. "I mean, yes, it's very serious." "Well, I hope you can find a solution. These celebrity chef types, they're probably used to having people clean up their messes for them." After I hung up, I poured myself a bourbon and reviewed the intelligence Cassie had provided. Tomorrow night, Dahlia and Alec had planned a romantic dinner at a bed and breakfast in Camden, about an hour north of Millbrook Harbor. They'd booked it under fake names, paid cash, thought they were being clever. They had no idea that their romantic getaway was about to become a very public spectacle. I called Mason. "How do you feel about a road trip?" The Seaside Inn in Camden was exactly the kind of place people went when they wanted privacy. Small, discreet. The type of establishment that minded its own business as long as the bills were paid. Under normal circumstances, Dahlia and Alec's rendezvous would have gone completely unnoticed. But these weren't normal circumstances. Mason and I arrived at 6 p.m., 2 hours before Dahlia and Alec were scheduled to check in. We took a room across the hall from theirs. Mason had called ahead, claimed to be a private investigator working a divorce case, and convinced the manager to cooperate in exchange for a generous consulting fee. "This feels like we're in a bad movie," Mason said as we set up our surveillance equipment. "The whole situation feels like a bad movie. At least we're directing this one." At 8:15, Dahlia's car pulled into the parking lot. I watched through the window as she and Alec got out, laughing about something, completely oblivious to the fact that they were being watched. They looked happy, carefree, like people who thought they'd gotten away with something. They had no idea how wrong they were. Mason had positioned cameras in the hallway, tiny devices that would record their comings and goings. But the real show was about to begin downstairs. At 9 p.m., I made my second anonymous phone call of the day, this one to the Camden Police Department. I'd like to report a disturbance at the Seaside Inn. There's a man in room 237 who's been threatening his companion. I think she might be in danger. The police arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers who took domestic disturbance calls very seriously, especially in a tourist town that depended on its reputation for safety and tranquility. I watched from our window as they knocked on Dahlia and Alec's door, as confusion turned to panic on both their faces. The conversation was animated, with lots of gesturing and raised voices. Dahlia kept insisting that everything was fine, that there had been some kind of mistake. Alec looked like he was about to have a heart attack. The officers spent 45 minutes investigating, taking statements, checking IDs. They didn't arrest anyone. There was no evidence of actual violence, but the damage was done. The romantic evening was ruined. The other guests were staring, and the inn's manager was asking pointed questions about why someone would call in a false report about guests who had checked in under fake names. But the best part came the next morning, when Dahlia had to explain to me why she'd spent the night at a Camden hotel instead of at the Portland venue crisis she'd described. "The situation was more complicated than I thought," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I had to stay overnight to coordinate with the backup venue." "In Camden?" "Yes. Why?" "Just seems like an odd place for a venue. Very small town, not much infrastructure for events. It was a last-minute option." I nodded sympathetically. "Well, I'm sure you did your best under difficult circumstances. These celebrity chef types probably aren't used to dealing with real crises. They're probably more accustomed to having other people solve their problems for them." Dahlia's smile looked like it was causing her physical pain. "Yes, some people definitely expect others to clean up their messes. Speaking of which, I saw the news about that restaurant closure. Coastal, wasn't it? Terrible situation. Food safety violations can destroy a business overnight. It's very unfortunate, especially for someone who's already having financial problems. I read that the owner owes money all over Portland. Must be incredibly stressful, having creditors breathing down your neck while your main source of income gets shut down by the health department." Dahlia went very still. "Where did you read that?" "Oh, you know how it is in Maine. Small business community, everyone knows everyone else's business. Plus, I have some clients in the restaurant industry. Word travels fast when someone's in trouble." That afternoon, I got a text from Cassie. "They're panicking. Alec wants to call everything off, but Dahlia's pushing him to stick with the plan. She says you're getting suspicious, and they need to move fast." Perfect. Panic made people sloppy, and sloppy people made mistakes. It was time to give them something real to panic about. The Millbrook Harbor Seafood Festival was the biggest event of the year in our little town. 3 days of lobster rolls, craft beer, and live music that drew tourists from across New England. This year, Dahlia was coordinating the VIP hospitality tent, a high-profile gig that she'd been bragging about for months. What she didn't know was that I'd been planning my own contribution to the festivities. "You want to do what?" Mason asked when I outlined my plan. "Public humiliation. Complete social destruction. The kind of spectacle that people will be talking about for years. Tris, that's elaborate and risky. If this goes wrong, it won't go wrong. I have thought through every angle. The beauty of small-town events is that everyone knows everyone, and secrets are impossible to keep. Over the past week, I'd been carefully feeding information to key people throughout Millbrook Harbor. Jimmy at the Rusty Anchor, Mrs. Henderson at the post office, the woman who ran the local Facebook group where half the town got their news. The story I'd been telling was simple and devastating. Dahlia Locke was having an affair with a celebrity chef who was using her to launder money through fake events. The chef's restaurant had been shut down for health violations. There were questions about missing client funds. The whole situation was about to explode. None of it was technically true, but all of it was believable enough to spread like wildfire through the community gossip network. By Friday morning, the first day of the festival, the whispers had reached critical mass. I could see it in the way people looked at Dahlia as she rushed around the VIP tent, barking orders at volunteers and checking details on her clipboard. Sympathetic glances mixed with speculative stares. The kind of attention that made someone feel like they were under a microscope. "Everything looks great," I told her when I stopped by the tent around noon. "Very professional setup." "Thank you." Her smile was strained. "I just want everything to be perfect." "I'm sure it will be. Although I heard there might be some drama this weekend. Something about that chef you've been working with?" Dahlia went very still. "What kind of drama?" "Oh, probably just gossip. You know how people talk in small towns. Something about financial problems, health department issues. I'm sure it's nothing that affects your work with him." "Right. Of course. Although it might be smart to distance yourself from any negative publicity. Your reputation is everything in this business." That evening, the festival's opening ceremony featured speeches from local dignitaries, the mayor, and several prominent business owners. Dahlia was scheduled to introduce the evening's entertainment, a local band that played classic rock covers and Jimmy Buffett songs. What happened instead was much more interesting. At exactly 7:30 p.m., as Dahlia stepped up to the microphone, her phone began ringing. Loudly. She'd forgotten to turn it off, and the ringtone, some generic pop song, echoed through the festival's sound system. She fumbled for the phone, trying to silence it, but in her panic, she accidentally answered the call instead. Alex's voice amplified through the speakers for the entire crowd to hear. "Dahlia, thank God, we need to talk. The health department is asking questions about our financial arrangement. Someone's been feeding them information about the money transfers. I think your husband knows." She finally managed to hang up, but the damage was done. 300 people had just heard a man who wasn't her husband talking about money transfers and suspicious activity. The crowd was buzzing with excitement, phones were coming out to record video, and Dahlia looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. But I wasn't finished. As she tried to recover, stumbling through her introduction of the band, I activated the second phase of my plan. Mason, positioned near the festival's main information booth, began distributing flyers that Cassie had helped us prepare. The flyers looked official, professional layout, festival logo, the works. The headline read, "Festival Security Alert. Be aware of financial scams targeting local events." The text was a masterpiece of careful wording. Festival organizers have been made aware of individuals using fake business relationships to gain access to event funds and client information. If you have been approached by representatives of Coastal Restaurant or associated businesses, please report any suspicious activity to festival security. Within minutes, the flyers were being shared throughout the crowd. People were reading them, discussing them, looking toward the VIP tent where Dahlia was trying to manage her hospitality duties while fielding increasingly uncomfortable questions from guests. But the coup de grace came at 9 p.m. when Alec himself showed up. I spotted him before Dahlia did, pushing through the crowd with the kind of desperate urgency that suggested panic. He looked terrible. Unshaven, wrinkled clothes, the appearance of a man whose carefully constructed life was falling apart. He found Dahlia near the VIP bar, grabbed her arm, and started an animated conversation that quickly escalated into an argument. I couldn't hear the words over the band's music, but I could read the body language. Accusation, denial, desperation. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, Evelyn Morrison appeared. Evelyn was Dahlia's best friend and biggest enabler, a woman who thrived on drama and gossip as long as she wasn't the target. She'd been part of Dahlia's inner circle for years, privy to secrets and schemes, always ready with support and alibis. But Evelyn was also ambitious, and she'd been watching Dahlia's social stock plummet all week. When she saw Alec and Dahlia arguing in public, When she realized that her association with Dahlia might damage her own reputation, she made a calculated decision. She pulled out her phone and started recording. The video she captured, Alec gesticulating wildly, Dahlia trying to calm him down, both of them clearly in crisis, would be uploaded to Facebook within the hour. By morning, it would have been shared dozens of times, accompanied by increasingly creative theories about what was really happening. But for me, watching from across the crowd, the best part was seeing the moment when Dahlia realized that her best friend had just thrown her under the bus. The look of betrayal on her face was almost worth everything I'd been through. The festival continued around them, but for Dahlia and Alec, the party was over. They left separately, both looking defeated, both knowing that their secret was secret no longer. Phase 1 of the festival plan was complete, but I still had 2 more days to work with, and I was just getting started. Saturday morning brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Alec showed up at my house. I was in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the local newspaper's coverage of the festival opening, which mentioned technical difficulties during the evening program but didn't elaborate, when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see him pacing on my front porch like a caged animal. This was either very stupid or very desperate, possibly both. I opened the door with my best confused neighbor expression. "Can I help you?" "You're Tristan Locke." "That's right. I'm Alec Drummond. I think we need to talk." Up close, he looked even worse than he had at the festival. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were shaking slightly, and he had the general appearance of a man who hadn't slept in days. The careful grooming and designer stubble that defined his television persona had been replaced by genuine scruff and desperation. "I'm not sure what we'd have to talk about, Mr. Drummond." "Cut the bullshit. I know you know about Dahlia and me." I let a few seconds of silence stretch between us, then stepped back from the door. "You'd better come in." We sat in my living room, 2 men who had nothing in common except for a shared connection to a woman who had lied to both of us. Alec perched on the edge of the couch like he was ready to bolt at any moment. I settled into my favorite chair and waited for him to make the first move. "Look," he said finally, "I know how this looks, but you don't understand the whole situation. Enlighten me." "Dahlia told me your marriage was over. She said you were separated, that you were just living in the same house until the divorce was finalized. She said you were controlling and emotionally abusive, that she was afraid of what you might do if you found out she was seeing someone." I almost laughed. It was such a perfect example of Dahlia's manipulation, painting herself as the victim while positioning everyone else as either saviors or villains. "And you believe that?" "Why wouldn't I?" She seemed genuinely scared. And she knew things about divorce law, about restraining orders and asset protection. It all sounded legitimate. "What changed your mind?" Alec ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that probably looked rakish and charming on television but just seemed pathetic in my living room. "This week, the restaurant closure, the festival thing, people asking questions about money. Dahlia's been acting different, more desperate. And then last night, after we left the festival, she started talking about accelerating our timeline." "What timeline?" "The plan to get you out of the house. She wanted to stage an incident, call the police, claim domestic violence. She said we couldn't wait anymore, that you were getting too suspicious." There it was. Confirmation of everything Cassie had told me, straight from the source. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was cataloging every word for future use. "So why are you here, Mr. Drummond?" "Because I'm not a criminal. I ran a restaurant. I'm not some con artist who destroys people's lives for money. When I realized what Dahlia was really planning, what she'd been lying about." He trailed off, shook his head. "I can't be part of this." "What exactly do you think this is?" "Identity theft, financial fraud. She's been using your accounts to funnel money to my creditors, but she's also been skimming from her client accounts to cover the transfers. When her clients start demanding audits, When the police start investigating, she's planning to blame everything on you. Claim you forced her to do it, that she was afraid to refuse. The scope of Dahlia's betrayal was breathtaking. It wasn't just adultery, it was a comprehensive plan to destroy my life and steal everything I'd worked for. The woman I'd been married to for 8 years had been systematically setting me up to take the fall for her crimes. Why are you telling me this? Because I want out. I want to disappear, start over somewhere else, pretend none of this ever happened. But I can't do that if you're going to prison for something you didn't do. How noble of you. Alex's face flushed. Look, I know I'm not the good guy here. I slept with your wife, I took your money, I helped her lie to you. But I'm not going to let her destroy your life to save herself. What do you want from me? Nothing. I just wanted you to know the truth before I leave town. Maybe that gives you enough warning to protect yourself. He stood up, headed for the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About all of it. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, processing what I'd learned. Dahlia's betrayal was worse than I'd imagined, but Alex's confession had also given me something valuable, a complete picture of her plan and a potential witness to her crimes. More importantly, it had given me the final piece I needed for my own endgame. I called Mason. Change of plans. We're moving to phase 3. What happened? Alec Drummond just confessed everything. Financial fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to file false police reports, the whole thing. Please tell me you recorded that conversation. Every word. I patted the small digital recorder in my pocket. And Mason, I think it's time to bring in some official help. That afternoon, I walked into the Millbrook Harbor Police Department and asked to speak with Detective Sarah Walsh, the officer who handled white-collar crime investigations. I'd done my research. Detective Walsh had a reputation for thoroughness and a particular dislike for people who used the legal system to hurt innocent victims. Mr. Locke, she said, settling into her chair across from me. What can I do for you? I placed a thick folder on her desk. I'd like to report multiple felonies committed by my wife and her accomplice. For the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. The financial fraud, the identity theft, the plan to file false domestic violence charges. I provided bank records, recorded conversations, witness statements from Cassie, and Alex's confession. I showed her the fake bruise photos Dahlia had been taking, the forged documents, the elaborate web of lies she'd constructed. Detective Walsh listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more serious as the scope of the crimes became clear. This is extensive, she said finally, and if everything you're alleging is true, we're talking about multiple felony charges. But I have to ask, why didn't you come forward sooner? Because I wanted to be absolutely certain, and because I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves. What do you mean? I smiled. Tomorrow is the last day of the seafood festival. Dahlia's planning to make her move then, stage the domestic violence incident, have me arrested, seize control of our assets while I'm in jail. She thinks she's backed me into a corner. But instead she's walked into a trap. Tomorrow, in front of half the town, Dahlia's going to discover that her perfect plan has become her perfect downfall. Detective Walsh leaned back in her chair, studying me. Mr. Locke, I hope you're not planning anything illegal. Nothing illegal, Detective. Just a little public education about the consequences of fraud and betrayal. I'll need some time to review all this evidence, possibly get warrants. Of course. Take all the time you need. Just make sure you're at the festival tomorrow evening. I have a feeling you're going to want to be there for the finale. As I left the police station, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete confidence. All the pieces were in place, all the players were positioned, and tomorrow would bring the conclusion to this elaborate game of chess that Dahlia had started, but I was going to finish. The festival's final day was going to be memorable for everyone involved. Sunday evening at the Millbrook Harbor Seafood Festival was traditionally reserved for the awards ceremony and charity auction, a genteel affair where local businesses donated prizes and wealthy summer residents bid on vacation packages and restaurant gift certificates. Dahlia had been coordinating the event for weeks, and it was supposed to be the crown jewel of her festival involvement. Instead, it became the stage for her complete destruction. I arrived at the festival grounds at 6 p.m., an hour before the auction was scheduled to begin. The VIP tent was bustling with activity as volunteers arranged auction items and Dahlia supervised the setup with her usual perfectionist intensity. She looked composed, professional, every inch the successful event planner she'd worked so hard to become. She had no idea that Detective Walsh and 2 other officers were positioned throughout the crowd, or that Mason had cameras recording everything from multiple angles, or that Cassie was wearing a wire and documenting Dahlia's every instruction. At 6:30, Alec appeared at the edge of the crowd. I hadn't expected him to show up. He'd seemed genuinely committed to leaving town and putting the whole situation behind him. But there he was, looking nervous and conflicted, watching Dahlia from a distance. Maybe he'd developed genuine feelings for her. Maybe he was having second thoughts about abandoning their plan. Or maybe he was just too weak to completely break away from the woman who had dominated his life for the past few months. It didn't matter. His presence would only make what was about to happen more dramatic. At 7 p.m., the auction began. Dahlia took the stage with her practiced smile and professional demeanor, welcoming the crowd and explaining how the evening would proceed. She looked confident, in control, completely unaware that she was about to experience the most humiliating moment of her life. "Before we begin with our wonderful auction items," she announced, "I'd like to take a moment to thank all the volunteers and sponsors who made this festival possible." That was my cue. I stood up from my seat in the front row and began walking toward the stage. Dahlia saw me coming, and her smile flickered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "And of course," she continued, "I want to thank my husband Tristan for his support throughout this process." "That's very kind of you, Dahlia," I said, taking the microphone from her hands. "But I think there are a few things the community should know about how this festival was really organized." The crowd grew quiet, sensing drama. Dahlia's professional smile had frozen into something that looked more like a grimace. "Tris, what are you doing?" "I'm providing some transparency about where their money has been going." I turned to address the crowd directly. "How many of you made donations to festival events that were supposedly being coordinated with Coastal Restaurant?" A dozen hands went up throughout the crowd. "And how many of you were told that those donations were going toward a special VIP dinner series featuring celebrity chef Alec Drummond?" More hands. "Well, I have some interesting news about those donations." I pulled out a folder of documents. It turns out that Coastal Restaurant has been closed by the health department for multiple violations. The VIP dinner series never existed, and the money you donated has been used for some very creative purposes. Dahlia was backing away from me, her face pale. "Tristan, stop. You don't know what you're talking about." "Actually, I know exactly what I'm talking about. For example, I know that you've been embezzling money from client accounts to fund your boyfriend's failing restaurant. I know that you've been using our joint credit cards to pay his debts. And I know that you've been planning to frame me for domestic violence to cover up your crimes." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I could see phones coming out, people recording video, the kind of attention that would ensure this moment lived forever on social media. "I also know," I continued, "that your boyfriend is here tonight. Alec, would you like to come up and explain to everyone how this scam worked?" Alec looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground, but the crowd was already turning to stare at him. He was trapped, exposed, with nowhere to run. "That's not," Dahlia started to say, but I cut her off. "Oh, but it is, and I have proof." I gestured toward Detective Walsh, who was making her way through the crowd. "Detective Walsh has been investigating this case all week. I think she has some questions for both of you." That's when Dahlia finally understood what was happening. The color drained from her face as she saw the police officers, realized that her carefully constructed plan had collapsed completely. "You bastard," she hissed. "You set me up." "No, Dahlia, you set yourself up. I just documented it." Detective Walsh reached the stage, followed by her colleagues. "Dahlia Monroe Locke, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to file false police reports." The crowd erupted. People were shouting questions, cameras were flashing, and Dahlia was being led away in handcuffs while protesting her innocence and screaming accusations at me. But I wasn't finished. As the police were processing Dahlia, I turned back to the microphone. "Before we continue with our regularly scheduled auction, I have one more announcement. All donations that were fraudulently obtained will be returned to the donors within the next week. Additionally, I'm personally donating $50,000 to the festival's emergency fund to ensure that this kind of fraud can never happen again." The crowd cheered. In the space of 10 minutes, I'd gone from victim to hero, from the boring husband who'd been betrayed to the man who'd exposed corruption and saved the community from financial fraud. As the police led Dahlia and Alec away, I caught sight of Evelyn Morrison in the crowd. She was recording everything on her phone, no doubt already planning how to spin her role in the drama to maximize her own social benefit. But that was fine. Everyone was going to spin this story their own way, and in every version, I was going to come out looking like the wronged husband who'd gotten justice. The auction continued without Dahlia, managed by volunteers who stepped up to fill the gap. I stayed for another hour, accepting condolences and congratulations from neighbors and strangers, playing the role of the dignified victim who'd found the strength to fight back. But inside, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Satisfaction. Complete, total, overwhelming satisfaction. Dahlia had tried to destroy my life, and instead, she'd destroyed her own. Alec had thought he could use me to solve his financial problems, and instead, he'd ended up facing criminal charges. They'd both underestimated the boring, predictable husband who just wanted to be left alone. That had been their biggest mistake. 3 months later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, signing the final divorce papers. Dahlia had pled guilty to multiple felony charges and was serving 18 months in minimum security prison. Alec had fled the state after posting bail and was currently wanted on multiple warrants. "So that's it," my lawyer said. "You're officially a free man." "What about the house?" "Yours. She forfeited any claim to marital assets when she was convicted of using them to commit crimes. Same with the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, everything." I walked out of the lawyer's office into a bright October afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in years. The leaves were changing, the air was crisp, and I had the rest of my life ahead of me. My phone buzzed with a text from Mason. "Drinks at the Anchor? I'm buying." I typed back, "On my way." As I drove through downtown Millbrook Harbor, I passed the empty storefront that had once housed Coastal Restaurant. There was a for-lease sign in the window and a pile of mail scattered on the floor inside. In a few months, someone else would rent the space and try their luck at the restaurant business, probably without knowing about the drama that had played out there. That was fine. Some stories were better left buried. I pulled into the parking lot of the Rusty Anchor and sat in my car for a moment, looking at the familiar building where I'd started this whole adventure with a few carefully placed words to Jimmy the bartender. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Inside, Mason was already at the bar, 2 beers waiting. The place was crowded with the usual Sunday afternoon crowd, locals watching football, tourists getting one last taste of authentic Maine atmosphere before heading home. "So," Mason said as I sat down, "what's next for the newly single Tristan Locke?" "Honestly, I have no idea. For the first time in years, I get to decide what my life looks like. That's either terrifying or liberating. Both." We drank our beers in comfortable silence, watching the game on the television above the bar. Around us, the conversations were about normal things: work, weather, sports, family, the kind of ordinary drama that made up most people's lives. It felt good to be ordinary again. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Locke, this is Cassie. I wanted you to know that I got a job with a catering company in Boston. Thank you for everything. You deserved better than what she did to you." I typed back, "Good luck with the new job. You did the right thing." As I put my phone away, Jimmy the bartender appeared in front of us. "Another round?" "Sure," I said. "And Jimmy, thanks for listening to all my complaints about my marriage problems. I know it wasn't the most exciting conversation." Jimmy grinned. "Are you kidding? That was the best gossip this place has seen in years. You're practically a local legend now." "Great. Just what every guy wants to be known for." "Hey, you could be known for worse things. At least you're the guy who fought back and won." As the afternoon stretched into evening, I found myself thinking about Dahlia, probably sitting in her prison cell, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Did she blame me for her downfall? Did she blame Alec? Or had she finally developed enough self-awareness to understand that she'd destroyed herself? It didn't matter. She was no longer my problem, no longer my responsibility. For the first time in years, the only person I had to worry about was myself, and that felt like the greatest freedom in the world.